Yes, we've seen the Ninth Assembly been in the saddle of legislative governance for the past 4 years. Many times, I can tell you that the Ninth National Assembly was in the news for not very good reasons. But I think at other times too, they were in the news for very good reasons. And don't also forget that we are coming from an era. Previous assemblies were known for, fightings, physical assaults, throwing of chairs, and so on. And to the extent that the Ninth National Assembly was not in the news for that kind of problem, I think we should give it to them that, relatively speaking, it was a mature assembly.
I would say they will go down in history as one of the most productive in terms of outcomes and outputs. Yes, they passed an unprecedented number of bills into laws. However, the impact of most of those laws will only be known as time progresses. But I think the Ninth National Assembly will be remembered more as one of the missed opportunities and one that abdicated its responsibilities with regards to its constitutional mandate or responsibility of overseeing executive actions.
The Ninth Assembly was in the saddle of legislative power and governance between June 2019 and June 2023. But then the statistics we have perhaps is up to March 2023. And from what we saw in the Ninth Assembly, they introduced a total of 3,222 bills. And of that number, they passed 589 as at the period in March that we compiled this report. Of course, 13 of the bills were negatived, and 5 were withdrawn, and then 93 were assented to. Now, if you look at from the number that was assented to, it means that we had a percentage of 15.7% achievement. Now, in calculating the efficiency, and how do we calculate the efficiency? It means we are dividing the number of bills passed by the number of bills adopted or introduced. In efficiency terms, they had 18.2%.
Since inauguration, the National Assembly received a total of 1,250 petitions, out of which they were only able to resolve or to conclude 181. So you see the wide gap between the total number of petitions received and petitions completed, which indicates gross inefficiency, because at 181 gives the National Assembly only an efficiency rating of just 14.6%, which is not good at all. I think that's abysmally low.
Oversight is a major function of the National Assembly, like we all know, and which is about the supervision and the scrutinizing of government programs and projects. But let me say this very quickly, that there seems to be a kind of misnomer. It's a very wrong notion, and sometimes it's like the general public tends to assess the National Assembly when you're talking of oversight from the point of visits and tours to government institutions, government agencies. Yes, when you look at the means of oversight, how do you carry out oversight? Yes, visits to physical locations is one of them, but I think it's much more than that. You have to question government officials. You have to review or confirm, executive appointments. And of course, there are inquiries and there are investigations and hearings. So these are means of oversight, but visits is just one. So it's not only when you see lawmakers visiting a place and maybe asking questions. No, the bulk of the oversight work is done. You don't even have to really go out. In fact, it's the work you do that will determine you're going out to visit, because you have to look, you have to question people, you have to study reports and all that. We saw so many mega probes that were carried out by previous assemblies, particularly the 8th Assembly, and they were carried over to the 9th Assembly, which were inconclusive. Now, there were so many ad hoc investigations, the National Pension Commission, Joint Senate Committee on Customs, Excise and Tariff, the NDDC probe, and for instance, in the NDDC probe, nothing has been had again. So, given all the above, we can see that oversight jobs were perhaps compromised. They were diluted and they led to wastages and abandonment of projects. And even so, when so much was put in by way of time and space.
I'll say it's a categorical failure for me. They had a cordial relationship with the executive. It was rancor-free, and it was harmonious. But the harmony and the cordiality came at the expense of the 9th National Assembly fulfilling their constitutional mandate of oversight. There are several illustrations, from confirmation of political nominees to loan approvals from the president. And a lot of the times they did that without proper scrutiny. There wasn't any rigorous scrutiny of request for loan approvals. And in fact, sometimes they were done in flagrant breach of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So I would say the 9th National Assembly did poorly regarding oversight. For me, what I would consider critical bills passed by the 9th National Assembly would be the constitutional amendment bills, especially those relating to devolution of power, local government autonomy, independent candidacy, and streamlining the implementation framework for state houses of assemblies and state judiciaries' financial independence. They are what I would refer to as very critical legislation that were passed by the 9th National Assembly. And I think, again, I would say a huge missed opportunity for me were the 5 gender-related constitutional amendment bills that fell at the National Assembly. Those were huge missed opportunities for the National Assembly.
Possibly as a result of the controversial nature of some of those bills, it became technically impossible for the 9th Assembly to pass them. One of them is the Nigeria Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulations Bill, or what you call the social media bill. The failure stemmed from the fact that of course, you know, this was a bill that was supposed to regulate social media, to check fake news on the internet. And for a number of reasons, this became very controversial. Just like what happened to the Freedom of Information Bill in the past. And people are very sensitive to the issue of information and allied matters. So for certain reasons that could not go through. We also had the Boko Haram Rehabilitation Bill, and this was a bill that was supposed to facilitate the establishment of an agency to rehabilitate, de-radicalize, and integrate repentant insurgents. But this could not go through because perhaps lawmakers felt that the attempt to mainstream, insurgents into the main society had security implications, and it could compromise security. And I think that became an issue. Then we also had the National Water Resource Bill. This bill could not get concurrence at the level of the two houses in the 8th National Assembly, we must remember. It was reintroduced into the 9th Assembly and even crossed to the committee stage. And but I think somehow it was felt that this bill was going to, infringe on Nigerians' right to water, which they believe should be free. And they felt, why do you make the issues of water exclusive to a centralized authority? And you have to get a permit to be able to draw, dig boreholes and things like that. So it became that controversial, and I think at the end of the day, it couldn't see the light of the day. And also, the control of the infectious disease bill, on the heels of the COVID-19 saga, lawmakers proposed a repeal of the Quarantine Act of 1926, and with the enactment of this bill, Control of Infectious Disease Bill. However, I think there was that feeling that the bill had to be rejected because it was concentrating too much powers in the hands of, the authority of government, the Minister of Health or the DG of the NCDC, and they felt that that was not healthy enough. And a few other bills like that, but these were quite top on the list. That's an interesting area, relationship at any point in time. It's a very topical issue, and it's not an exception when it came to the parliament and the executive. But let me say that when there's cordiality, when there's harmony between the two arms of government, it's an essential pivot, an essential fulcrum on which every other thing stands. But then let us assess, and you cannot say this without really looking at the executive and who is leading the executive. But now, why do conflicts even happen? Several reasons, and somebody talked about fragile ego. And fragile ego is about arrogance, it's about dictatorship, and it's also about immaturity. And we also have overlapping roles and misconceptions, misuse of powers, executive meddlesomeness, and I can go on and on. Now, but let me say that whatever the case is, many people believe that the 9th Assembly, the relative period of calmness that they had, resulted in a number of advantages. For instance, we were able to get the January to December budget cycle back, and people have assessed that is as a result of the calm relationship that was there. And, there was smooth passage of some very important bills like the Finance Act, the Police Act, and so on. And people trace that. Yes, you can give that to them. But let me say finally, bear in mind that many people believe that a scenario where the legislature genuflects unnecessarily, capitulates, and operates in servility to the executive is not a good sign of a functioning democracy. And that is an antithesis to the doctrine of separation of powers and checks and balances.
Again, like I've said earlier, it was cordial, harmonious, and rancor-free. But harmony, a cordiality, like I said earlier, again, came at the expense of rigorous oversight.
Okay, I think one way that can be done is to promote transparency. and for the public, the general public, to be generally aware of what the National Assembly does, what their mandate is. For people to be able to participate in all of this, the first one which would understand, what the National Assembly is doing. And from my own assessment, from my own opinion, I think generally, I would say the general public, if you really assess it, they don't really know what the National Assembly is all about and what they do. And in order to promote participation, yes, so civil society organizations may have access. But in terms of the general public, in order to promote participation, I would say, one, it's important for people to be aware of what the National Assembly even does and how they can come in. And then to promote transparency. I would also say that, in terms of constituency, how many people, have access to their, their legislations, and how many people have access to them. So I think generally, one, creating awareness of what, the National Assembly does, transparency in what we do, and also, creating that access.
The National Assembly has no business if it's not about the citizens. And if you are denying the same citizens access to you, then something is definitely wrong somewhere. Now, the CSOs, they are in the same bracket. Now, governance, it's about citizens' participation. And that is primarily what the civil society organizations are doing. So, a situation whereby an assembly will make itself inaccessible to the citizens and to the CSOs, I think it's a kind of misnomer, and something is definitely wrong there, because these are the partners and these are the stakeholders.
Yeah, well, it's the idea of that. I think that, if these people, the new people, if they are really, if what they really were elected for, what they were set to do, if they really have that in mind, I think they should, first of all, consolidate on some of the gains of the National Assembly, integrate themselves. And with this integration, I don't think that there should be any issue in terms of continuity, because when you have new people, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be negative. What I see it, as there's going to be positives and negatives.
It's really been an issue, and it's quite sad. We've hardly been able to cross the 20 to 30% return rate. And I can tell you that for a number of reasons, if we've not been able to cross this spectrum, it's unfortunate. And many reasons account for this. Genuinely, some lawmakers are thrown out because of poor representation. And sometimes, too, the problem is at the level of our constituents. Perhaps they do not even understand the proper role of the lawmakers. And there are other issues which we coin funnily and talk about stomach infrastructure and all that, which we can't talk about here. Well, the effect, it affects the National Assembly quite negatively, because number one, you need to train lawmakers afresh in the methods, the practice, and the procedure of lawmaking. And that is not an easy task.
In my own opinion, I think that the priority should be, for the 20th century to come up with, legislations that would address issues of poverty, issues of insecurity, and even unemployment.
I want to say too, I think the 10th National Assembly should prioritize gender issues and internal reforms that will enhance transparency, accountability, and openness in the business of the legislature. And I think it's what if that the newly elected president of the Senate alluded to the issues in his acceptance speech.
Let me say that top on the agenda, if you ask me this personal, is that they should try to project themselves as a new set of lawmakers that are primarily prepared to execute a new agenda, let me put it that way.
In my own opinion, I think that yes, while there have been, various campaigns, various interventions to promote women's participation in generally in politics and leadership, I think it's we're still at the bottom there. And I think that one critical issue is in cultural movements. So for the 10th Assembly, so even if there are, certain legislations that promote women's participation, how do we then drive that goal, for women to begin to participate? So on one hand, you have, legislations that won't promote women's participation. On the other hand, you see, in general, with apathy in women's participation.
The outgone assembly or the 9th Assembly, I remember Honorable Nkiruka Onyejiocha and the last speaker of the 9th Assembly, Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, did so much in sponsoring this bill to try to remedy the low representation of women in the legislative houses, not just in the National Assembly, but across the states in the country. And there are so many other reports that give a good background to the fact that Nigeria is really ranking very low. For instance, the IPU report in 2019 gave the global percentage of women in legislative positions 42.4%. And of the 193 countries that were studied, Nigeria ranked 181. That was quite bad. Now, when you see what these two lawmakers tried to do, it also aligned with the Justice Uwai electoral report of 2008, which recommended, an electoral system that will give women more seats in the legislative houses. But then, why efforts have failed, I'll give you two classes. One are external, the others are internal. When I say external to the institution of the National Assembly and the lawmakers. And because there are so many challenges outside. One, we are living in an atmosphere of gender-based discrimination. Two, there are so many socio-cultural factors that are not supporting the bid for women to be high up in the legislative institutions. And then we also have a very, very inclement and very hostile environment. A slow level of women education. And, we have a very restrained political space. I can't mention all. So these are there in the environment. Now, added to this is the fact that even in the legislative institution itself, the support and the efforts by women themselves appears inadequate. That is part of the problem in the past. And I think women needed to have talked more. They needed to have educated more. They needed to have promoted the agenda more. I'm not saying they didn't do it, but they needed to do more. And they needed to publicize more. They needed to sell the idea in better ways.